Have you ever wondered why silence feels heavier than words, why it clings to the skin like a storm that never breaks? A man can withstand shouts, accusations, even the cruelty of rejection, but when she withdraws into silence, his mind fractures. It is not the absence of sound that torments him, but the echo of something far older, something buried in his unconscious. Her silence is not empty. It is a mirror, forcing him to confront the parts of himself he cannot name. He reaches for her, not because of her words, but because of the haunting void she leaves behind. In that moment, his ego scrambles for footing. The masculine psyche, as Jung described, is deeply tethered to the anima, the inner feminine image that whispers of completeness. When a woman retreats into silence, the man does not simply miss her presence. He feels abandoned by his own soul. The silence slices deeper than any insult, because it reveals a hunger he cannot satisfy through control, charm, or conquest. Her absence exposes his dependency, the part of him that still seeks the mother's gaze, the little boy staring into the void when no one comes. You may not realize it, but when you hold back your words, you awaken the most primitive layers of his psyche. Silence becomes an alchemical vessel. He projects onto it everything he fears and everything he desires. To him, you become the high priestess, enigmatic, unreachable, veiled in mystery. She who holds secrets he longs to decipher. He doesn't crave your explanations. He craves access to the mystery itself. And the more you refuse to fill the air with reassurance, the deeper he spirals into obsession. This is why silence carries a power few women understand. It is not manipulation. It is resonance with an archetype older than civilization. The oracle did not beg to be understood. She sat behind the veil, and kings traveled across empires for a single word. Your stillness awakens that same gravitational pull. It forces him to chase not just you, but the missing pieces within himself. Silence becomes the cracked mirror in which he sees his shadow, his jealousy, his fear, his neediness, all staring back at him with merciless clarity. Yet here is the paradox. His conscious mind interprets your silence as rejection, while his unconscious interprets it as sacred presence. He cannot rest. He cannot dismiss you. Every unanswered message, every pause before a reply, every vanishing act from your world ties him tighter to you. Because in your absence, he is left only with himself. And for a man who has never truly faced his shadow, that is unbearable. You have become the key he does not know how to turn. Notice how quickly his mind spins. He replays past words, imagines what you are doing, invents stories of betrayal or indifference. He does not realize that these fantasies are born not from you but from his own unconscious. You are not the author of his madness. You are the stage on which his psyche reveals itself. The more he struggles to break free, the more tangled he becomes in his projections. That is why he obsesses, not because of what you said, but because of what you withheld. And here lies the seed of empowerment. When you resist the impulse to explain, to soothe, to fill the silence, you reclaim sovereignty. You refuse to carry his projections for him. Instead, you stand as the silent oracle, neither cruel nor submissive, simply present in your own gravity. This forces him into a choice. Either he confronts the shadow that silence unveils, or he runs from it and seeks another distraction. But either way, the mirror has already been shown, and he will never forget it. Think of silence as fire contained in a lamp. Handled without awareness, it can burn and destroy. But embraced with intention, it illuminates with an otherworldly glow. The question is not whether silence will affect him. The question is whether you will wield it unconsciously as a weapon of fear or consciously as a symbol of your self-possession. For when silence comes from emptiness, it is cruelty. But when it comes from fullness, it is sacred power. So ask yourself now, when he drowns in the absence of your words, is it really you he longs for? Or is it the forgotten fragments of himself reflected in your silence? And if that is true, What happens when the silence is stretched long enough that he cannot escape facing what lies within? Imagine the man pacing his room at midnight, replaying conversations in his head like broken film reels. He cannot settle because silence leaves him with questions that gnaw at his nerves. The mind despises a vacuum. Where there are no words, it fabricates meaning. And so, in your silence, he begins to project. Was it something he said? Was there another man? Was he not enough? Each unanswered question is like a stone dropped into water, ripples spreading wider until his entire psyche vibrates with unease. What he believes he seeks in you is closure, but what he truly seeks is relief from his own shadow. Jung called it the shadow not because it is evil, but because it hides behind the light of who we pretend to be. The man may see himself as confident, composed, in control, but your silence cuts into that mask, exposing the parts he keeps buried, the jealousy, the insecurity, the desperate hunger to be chosen. Suddenly, the well-dressed, self-assured man becomes the boy again, rattling the locked door of his mother's attention. He is pulled back into the raw truth that his worth feels contingent upon a woman's gaze. And this regression terrifies him, though he may not admit it even to himself. You stand there saying nothing and unknowingly awaken ancient archetypes within him. To him, you are no longer just yourself. You become the siren who lures with absence instead of song, the muse who retreats into a temple of silence, the high priestess who withholds the oracle until he proves worthy. This is why silence feels maddening, because it isn't passive. It is active, alive, magnetic. It forces him to chase what is withheld, not because he is entitled to it, but because the soul cannot rest when it senses mystery it cannot claim. And yet here lies the paradox. The more he obsesses, the less he sees you as you truly are. His anima projection wraps around your image like fog around a statue. He isn't chasing you, he's chasing the unfinished story within himself. That is why silence magnifies his desire. Words would collapse the projection. Clarification would end the mystery, but silence allows the projection to bloom until it becomes unbearable. He believes he needs your voice, your touch, your reassurance. What he truly needs is to encounter his own unconscious in its raw form. For you, the silence is not just absence. It is a form of self-possession. To withhold words is to refuse the role of emotional caretaker for his psyche. It is to stand sovereign, grounded in your own energy, unshaken by the waves of his need. This is not cruelty, it is the quiet revolution of detachment. By not rushing to soothe, you give him the opportunity to meet himself. And in this lies a hidden gift. Because whether he breaks or transforms, the mirror you have shown cannot be unseen. But be cautious. Silence is a double-edged blade. If used from fear, bitterness, or manipulation, it becomes toxic. It hardens into punishment rather than presence. That kind of silence is not power, it is corrosion. Yet when silence is born from fullness, when it comes from a woman rooted in her worth, it becomes sacred. It no longer says, "I withdraw to hurt you." It says, "I stand in my own wholeness, whether you meet me here or not." And that resonance changes everything. Notice how quickly he senses the difference. When silence comes from emptiness, he feels abandoned and despises you. When silence comes from fullness, he feels drawn and cannot explain why. One is shadow, the other is sovereignty. One breeds resentment, the other ignites obsession. The power does not lie in silence itself, but in the state of the woman who holds it. He is not only responding to the absence of your words, but to the presence of your energy. And so the madness grows. The silence reminds him that he is not in control. It strips him of the illusion that he can decode you with logic or bend you with effort. The more he tries, the more the silence swallows his attempts, like waves erasing footprints in the sand. This is what terrifies him most, that he cannot conquer what he cannot touch. He cannot silence the silence. And in that void, he begins to feel the cracks in his own armor widening. Yet the question lingers, sharp and unresolved. If silence holds such power over him, does it also hold power over you? Does your stillness draw from strength, or is it secretly a shield against your own fear of confrontation, your own avoidance of intimacy? And if silence can drive him into madness, what hidden truths might it awaken within you, should you dare to listen to its echo? Picture him again, restless in the silence, but now notice what begins to happen beneath the surface. His thoughts circle obsessively, yet each orbit drags him deeper into the gravity well of his unconscious. What began as irritation becomes yearning. What began as yearning becomes anxiety. And what began as anxiety mutates into fixation. He is no longer simply missing you. He is confronting the empty chamber within himself that has always existed but was kept quiet through distraction. Your silence has opened the door, and now the ghosts come pouring out. This is where Jung's idea of projection reveals its sharpest edge. When you say nothing, he cannot anchor his story to your voice, so he builds it out of shadows. Every insecurity, every buried wound, every forgotten rejection now finds its stage. And because it is easier to blame than to face, he casts you as both goddess and tormentor. You are the one who holds the key to his torment, and yet you are also the key. Phantom slipping further away. He cannot separate you from his own longing, so he begins to believe you are the source of it. But here lies the irony. Silence is not a weapon you aim at him. It is a mirror he cannot escape. It reflects his inner fragmentation, and the more he resists, the more powerful the reflection becomes. Imagine a man standing before a still pond at night. He peers into the water and sees not only his face but the distorted image of every shadow leaning behind him. He wants the water to move, to ripple, to give him relief, but the pond is unmoving. So the terror is not in you, but in what the stillness reveals. For the feminine psyche, silence carries a different weight. To embrace it consciously is to embody the silent oracle archetype. She does not explain. She does not justify. She does not rush to bridge the distance. Instead, she knows that silence itself is speech, just not in the language of noise. It is the language of energy, of presence, of gravity. To dwell in silence without fear is to step into an ancient current of feminine power, one that unsettles because it cannot be tamed. And the more sovereign the silence, the more his madness grows. But there is another layer, more subtle and more dangerous. If silence awakens his shadow, it also awakens yours. There is temptation in the power of absence, temptation to confuse sovereignty with superiority. A woman who mistakes silence for control may become addicted to the game of withholding, forgetting that silence without heart eventually collapses into emptiness. True silence is not absence but presence so complete that no explanation is needed. The silent oracle does not withdraw to punish. She withdraws because she knows her essence does not depend on being understood. You might feel the pull to test this power, to see how far he will unravel before breaking. And indeed, some men will shatter under the weight of it, fleeing into distraction, anger, or another woman's embrace. Others will return, shaken, seeking to confront what the silence has forced them to see. The outcome is not yours to control. The only question is whether your silence comes from fullness or fear. If it comes from fullness, then even his departure does not strip you of your center. If it comes from fear, then you too become ensnared in the very projections you once awakened. Notice the strange paradox. Words bind men to logic, but silence binds them to feeling. 1,000 explanations will not root themselves in his body, but one unresolved silence will live in his chest like an echo that refuses to die. He will carry it into his work, his relationships, even his dreams. He may tell himself he has moved on, but a single unresolved silence lingers longer than 100 confessions. It is not because he needs your words. It is because he cannot escape the confrontation with himself that your silence initiated. And so the question sharpens like a blade. What if the real madness he feels is not caused by you at all, but by the realization that he has never truly owned his own inner silence? That he has run from it his whole life, filling the void with noise, conquest, approval, distractions. And now, standing before your stillness, he is left with no refuge. If that is true, then the torment is not in being ignored by you. It is in being finally seen by his own shadow. Imagine the moment when his resistance begins to collapse. At first he fought the silence, demanded explanations in his mind, invented 1,000 stories to fill the gap. But eventually exhaustion sets in, and he cannot keep spinning the wheel forever. In that space, something unfamiliar emerges. He begins to feel the raw pulse of his own vulnerability. For perhaps the first time, he realizes that his sense of worth was never fully his own. It was always borrowed from the gaze of the feminine, always dependent on her words, her warmth, her confirmation that he exists. Your silence has stripped away the scaffolding, leaving him alone with the foundation of who he really is. This is why silence drives him into madness, not because he cannot hear your voice, but because he cannot avoid hearing his own. Jung spoke of individuation as the painful process of integrating what has been denied. In the mirror of your absence, he faces his disowned parts, the fear of abandonment, the hunger to be seen, the rage at his own fragility. Each one claws its way to the surface, demanding recognition. He feels as if you are torturing him, but in truth the torment belongs to his own psyche. Your silence has only unveiled the truth already waiting. For the woman, this is where the temptation grows sharpest. You sense the power silence holds. You see how it makes him restless, how it pulls him back again and again, how it creates an atmosphere of gravity that words could never achieve. But true sovereignty means resisting the urge to weaponize it. The silent oracle archetype does not manipulate, she radiates. Our silence is not a game but a state of being. To embody her is to be so rooted in your own essence that you no longer scramble to prove, explain, or justify. You do not run after his understanding because you know that what matters most is your own. Consider how silence rewrites the dynamic of power. When words are exchanged, each side can argue, defend, persuade. But silence is immune to debate. It cannot be refuted, cannot be undone. It is a presence that demands his psyche bend around it. This is why he feels both drawn and enraged. The silence cannot be conquered. He cannot out-argue what does not speak. He cannot seduce what does not respond. And so, the masculine energy is forced to confront its greatest fear, power that cannot be possessed. But notice also what silence does for you. In the stillness, you begin to hear the subtler layers of your own psyche. You may discover that his obsession, though flattering, is not the nourishment you truly seek. You may notice where your silence comes from pain instead of fullness, where it conceals fear of intimacy rather than strength. This is the hidden mirror silence offers women as well. It does not only awaken his shadow, it awakens yours. To use silence well, you must be willing to hear what it reflects within you. And yet the deeper he spirals, the clearer a truth begins to emerge. His madness is not simply about you. You are the symbol, but the hunger is older. It is the unhealed wound of his anima, the split between his masculine self and the feminine image within him. He believes your silence is driving him insane, but in truth, it is pointing him toward a deeper work, to reclaim the fragments of his soul he has projected onto you. Without this, he will always seek a woman to complete him and always feel shattered when she withdraws. This realization births a quiet empowerment for you. You see that his obsession is not evidence of your value, but of his own incompletion. You can hold the silence not as a weapon, not as a manipulation, but as a sacred boundary. You allow the mirror to stand, but you do not take responsibility for what he sees in it. You cannot carry his shadow for him, and you do not need to break your silence to rescue him from it. This is where sovereignty begins, not in control, but in detachment. So the question turns back upon you, sharp and luminous. If silence reveals his wounds and obsessions, what does your own silence reveal about you? Do you hold it from wholeness, or do you wield it from fear? And if silence can awaken such madness in him, what hidden power might it awaken in you if you dare to inhabit it fully, without apology? The silence lingers like a fog, and slowly it reshapes him. At first he fought against it, clawing for reassurance, grasping for your presence like a drowning man reaching for the shore. But the longer it holds, the more he realizes there is no external rescue. He must descend into the place he always avoided, the chamber of his own soul. This is where the real madness becomes a gift. In the torment of unanswered questions, he finally sees that the woman before him is not merely a lover, but the archetypal gatekeeper of his own transformation. Your silence has forced him into confrontation with himself. And what does he discover there? That the terror he feels is not about you leaving, but about the emptiness within himself that has always been there. The silence exposes the little boy abandoned in memory, the wounds that were never soothed, the need for feminine energy to confirm his worth. It shows him that his obsession with your silence is not about your absence, but about the absence he has always carried. He believed he could escape it by conquering women, chasing approval, drowning in distraction. But silence is merciless. It refuses to let him escape. In mythic language, you are no longer just a woman withholding words. You are the silent oracle at the temple gates, testing whether he has the courage to face his own shadow. Some men run, fleeing into the arms of noise, resenting the mirror you held. Others step closer, trembling but willing to endure the silence until it births revelation. For those who endure, the silence becomes initiation. They begin to realize that the feminine cannot be possessed, only respected. That love cannot heal what they refuse to confront. That wholeness must be claimed within, not begged for from without. This is why silence holds a paradoxical grace. It can break a man, but it can also awaken him. If he dares to sit in the emptiness, to breathe through the madness, to stop demanding your words as medicine, he may begin to integrate what Jung called the anima, the inner feminine image that lives within every man. And when that integration begins, his obsession with you softens. He no longer sees you only as goddess or ghost, but as a woman, sovereign, whole, standing in your own gravity. The spell of projection begins to dissolve, and in its place, something purer can emerge, genuine connection. For you, the silence also becomes initiation. To hold it without fear is to embody a deeper kind of sovereignty. You learn that you do not need to explain yourself to be valid. You learn that detachment is not coldness, but strength. You learn that the feminine does not always move by words, but by energy, by mystery, by presence. And you realize that his obsession, whether it fades or intensifies, is not the measure of your worth. Your worth exists regardless of his reaction, regardless of whether he stays or leaves. That is the heart of feminine power, being complete even when no one else validates it. But here the red thread emerges again. The cracked mirror shown in the first act returns in this moment. For him, the mirror was shattered by silence, showing him every fragment of himself he tried to deny. But for you, the silence polishes the same mirror until it becomes whole. You no longer look into it searching for his approval. You look into it and see yourself. Silent, sovereign, radiant, untouchable. The power is not in making him chase or making him suffer. The power is in realizing that you never needed to move at all. You were always enough, even in stillness. And so the cliff edge sharpens again. If silence holds such transformative power for both, then the real question is not whether silence drives him into madness. The real question is, will you wield it unconsciously, repeating the cycles of projection and pain, or will you hold it as the oracle holds her veil, a symbol of sovereignty, a gateway into truth. The silence now becomes something more than absence. It becomes atmosphere. It surrounds him like air too dense to breathe, pressing into every corner of his psyche. The more he resists, the more it teaches him. And though he may call it cruelty, though he may blame you for the torment, some part of him senses that this silence is not punishment but initiation. It is the dark night of his soul, the necessary descent before renewal. In Jungian language, this is the descent into the underworld of the unconscious, where the ego is stripped bare and the shadow waits to be integrated. You embody the high priestess in this myth. Veiled, untouchable, you do not reveal yourself at his demand. You do not rush to soothe or explain. And because of this, your presence grows larger in his psyche, until you are no longer just a woman he desires, but the living symbol of everything he both craves and fears. He longs to pierce the veil, yet fears what he might find. He rages at the silence, but secretly respects it, for it represents a power he cannot conquer. The madness lies in this paradox. The more he tries to control the silence, the more it controls him. For you, the silence is not passive. It is not simply doing nothing. It is the deliberate choice to let presence speak louder than words. This is why it feels magnetic, because the energy of detachment carries more weight than 1,000 explanations. You are not rushing to fix his feelings. You are not scrambling to prove your worth. Instead, you are resting in it. This restfulness terrifies him because it reveals that you are not dependent on his approval. It shows that you do not collapse in his absence. And nothing unsettles the masculine psyche more than realizing it cannot define the feminine's worth. But do not mistake this for cruelty. True silence, when born from fullness, is never about diminishing another. It is about standing whole within yourself, allowing the other to face what they must. It is not about making him suffer, but about refusing to take on the burden of his shadow. If he projects abandonment, betrayal, rejection, those belong to him, not you. Your silence is simply the mirror that reflects it. And whether he chooses to integrate those shadows or run from them is not your responsibility. The danger for many women is to confuse silence with suppression, to go quiet not from sovereignty but from fear of confrontation. That silence is brittle, anxious, easily broken. It does not radiate presence, it trembles with avoidance. A man feels the difference. One silence drives him into contempt, the other into obsession. One feels like punishment, the other like mystery. This is why self-awareness matters. If your silence is rooted in self-possession, it becomes an archetypal force. If it is rooted in fear, it collapses under the weight of his projections. Notice what happens to him the longer he lingers in the silence. He begins to wrestle not with you, but with himself. At times he curses you, at times he glorifies you, at times he despairs that he ever mattered to you at all. Yet underneath it, the silence keeps circling him back to the same realization. He cannot control you, and therefore he must face himself. It is this moment that terrifies him most. Because if he cannot fill the void with your words, he must either fill it with his own inner work, or surrender to madness. Here is the hidden gift. Your silence, when held consciously, can serve as a threshold. Some men will walk away, broken by the confrontation, unable to bear the reflection. Others will linger and rage, circling the mirror without ever looking directly into it. But the rare few will endure. They will sit in the silence long enough to hear not just the absence of your voice, but the whisper of their own soul. And when that happens, transformation begins. So ask yourself this: when silence drives him into madness, is it truly you who holds the power? Or is it the silence itself, ancient and archetypal, moving through you as a force far older than both of you? The silence stretches like a thread pulled too tight, and something begins to break, not in you but in him. He cannot keep circling forever, inventing stories to explain what he does not know. Eventually, the stories collapse under their own weight. He is left not with answers, but with a raw question. Who is he without your reflection? This is where silence cuts the deepest. It does not just torment him with absence, it strips him of identity. Without your voice, he cannot cling to the role he played in your presence. He cannot anchor himself in your responses. The silence leaves him naked, exposed to the truth that his worth was never secure in himself. This is why he obsesses, why he paces, why he returns to your memory like a moth to a flame. He is not just haunted by you, he is haunted by himself. Every unanswered text, every vanished call, every space between your words becomes a symbol of a deeper wound. The wound is ancient, reaching back to the boy who never received what he needed, to the man who learned to bury that boy beneath ambition, distraction, conquest. Now the silence cracks the ground open, and all the buried voices rise. He may curse you for it, but in truth, you have simply illuminated what was always waiting. For you, the silence becomes proof of something vital. It shows you how much gravity you carry without effort. Not because of performance, not because of persuasion, but simply because of presence. Silence is your reminder that worth is not measured in explanation. It is not earned by appeasing his fear. It is not negotiated through endless justification. True worth is silent because it does not need to argue for itself. The oracle does not shout. She waits. Those who are ready will approach. Those who are not will flee. Either way, she remains. But silence tests you too. It whispers in your ear, tempting you to wield it as control, to measure your power in the madness of men. This is where sovereignty must be guarded most fiercely. Because if your silence becomes performance, it loses its essence. The oracle does not withhold to manipulate. She withholds because she knows her essence cannot be demanded. To hold silence without falling into the ego's trap is to embody true mystery, not false superiority. The test is whether you can rest in it without needing to watch his reaction as proof. Notice how the archetype resolves itself. He stands before the veil, obsessed, enraged, entranced. He wants to tear it away, but tearing only reveals his own impatience. If he waits long enough, something shifts. He stops fighting. He stops demanding. He begins to realize that the veil is not meant to be pierced. It is meant to be honored. In that moment, his obsession can turn into reverence. And in reverence, he stops projecting the anima outward and begins to awaken it within himself. This is individuation in its rawest form, reclaiming the lost feminine, no longer demanding she come from you alone. And you, standing behind the veil, also transform. You see that his madness was never proof of your superiority, only of his fragmentation. You see that silence is not about making him smaller, but about keeping yourself whole. You see that the oracle's true power is not in withholding words, but in embodying presence so complete that words become unnecessary. The silence no longer feels like a tool. It feels like your natural state, rooted and radiant. The cracked mirror, first glimpsed in his torment, now appears again. He once saw his own shattered reflection in it, splintered by your silence. But now you hold it differently. No longer cracked, no longer distorted, but polished. And in its surface, you see yourself whole. The silence has given you back what the world tried to take, the knowing that you are enough, even without being understood. And so the red thread winds toward its end. If silence drives him into madness, it is only because it refuses to lie. It refuses to cover his wounds with noise. It forces truth to the surface, whether he is ready or not. And in that truth lies both destruction and creation, both collapse and rebirth. So the question now hangs between you and the silence itself. When the veil remains unlifted, when the mirror shows its ruthless clarity, when the silence stretches until it can no longer be ignored. Who will emerge transformed, him, you, or both? The silence becomes a final test, not of him alone, but of you as well. He has circled through longing, anger, projection, despair, and now something quieter takes hold. No more frantic attempts to decode you, no more desperate reaching for reassurance. Instead, he begins to feel the weight of his own incompleteness. The madness that once burned as fire becomes still as ash. And in that stillness, a realization dawns. He cannot force what is sovereign. He cannot command what is mystery. The silence teaches him a truth he could never learn through words. The feminine is not a possession, but a presence. This is where his journey splits. Some men will run, unable to bear the lesson. They will seek women who speak quickly, who soothe immediately, who rescue them from the shadow. They will repeat the cycle until the silence returns again in another form, another woman, another withdrawal. Others will stay, humbled, willing to endure the weight. For these, silence does not break them. It initiates them. It carves space within their psyche where reverence can grow. They begin to integrate the anima, to see that what they sought so desperately in you has always been waiting within them. The silence transforms from torment into teaching. And for you, the silence delivers its culmination. You stand as the silent oracle, but now you see clearly. Your power was never in how deeply he obsessed, but in how deeply you remained whole. His madness was never a reflection of your worth. It was a reflection of his inner fracture. The gift of silence is that it disentangles his shadow from your responsibility. You do not need to explain yourself to prove your value. You do not need to rescue him from his ghosts. You do not need to trade sovereignty for validation. You simply exist in your own presence, radiant in stillness. The cracked mirror completes its prophecy here. In the beginning, silence shattered his reflection, scattering pieces of shadow he could not bear. But now, as the dust settles, the mirror no longer belongs to him, it belongs to you. You lift it and see yourself whole, unbroken, undiminished. Silence has polished the glass until it reflects the truth you always carried, that you are enough, even unseen, even unheard. The oracle's veil is not a barrier, it is a crown. It does not hide you, it reveals you to yourself. This is the grand reward, the culmination of the red thread woven through the journey. The silence that once tormented becomes the silence that liberates. It gives him the chance to confront himself. It gives you the chance to reclaim yourself. And in that reclamation lies the essence of feminine sovereignty. You are no longer defined by his chase, his obsession, his madness. You are defined only by the wholeness of your own being. So let the silence remain when it must. Let it speak when words cannot. Let it teach what no explanation could. For the woman who knows her worth does not fear silence, she inhabits it. She does not chase validation in noise, she rests in stillness. She does not tremble at his obsession or his withdrawal, she chooses herself always. And now the final question returns to you with the weight of the entire journey. When the silence stretches long and the mirror shows its ruthless truth, will you collapse into fear? Or will you stand as the oracle, sovereign and whole, knowing that your worth has never depended on whether he understands? The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.